Doing well. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you have made it. This is the one and only world-famous Apollo Mission Control Center. This is where it all took place, ladies and gentlemen, in the late 60s and early 70s. All of our moon landings, all of the Apollo program was effected from this room right here. So not only is this the actual room, this is the actual equipment that was in the room on those days. We're sitting inside of a National Historic Landmark, and so that means that everything you see around you is authentic equipment from that day. So this is the actual equipment. This is not a movie set. These are not props. These are not models. The actual equipment. So if you ever wondered what the cutting edge technology used to look like in the 1960s, there you go. Now the room we're sitting in here is also the equipment from the 1960s. I can prove it to you, because if you're sitting in this second row of chairs or all the way to the back of the viewing room, if you look at the seat back in front of you, those gray metal containers are called ash trays. For all the healthy smokers in the 1960s. But because we are a National Historic Landmark, that means that everything has to be authentic, right down to our ashtrays. Now, the viewing room here was used by NASA administrators, high-ranking military officers. The families of the astronauts would come in here and watch what was going on with their loved one's mission. Every American president, from Lyndon Johnson to George W. Bush, has come here. In 1991, the Queen of England came and paid us a visit, and she sat in this row, and she sat in 1, 2, 3. You are queen for a day, where the Queen of England sat. She's got the whole thing down. The other group of people that really loved this room were astronauts. They were in here all the time. So it's, with the seats being full, I guarantee you that any number of you are sitting where many of the famous astronauts, well, all the astronauts are famous, some better than others. Maybe John Glenn sat in your seat. Maybe Neil Armstrong sat where you are. You just don't know. This mission control opened in 1965 and it served until 1992. During that time, there were 41 missions flown out of this mission control center. 10 of the Gemini missions, all 10 Apollo missions, including all of the lunar landings, and the first 21 of the space shuttle flights were flown out of this room. Then this room was decommissioned, as I say, in 1992, and we moved to the current mission control, which is actually one floor below our feet right now. You walk past it on your way up the stairs. Now they're having mission operations, so we're not able to go in and actually go into the viewing room, but they gave us a little window to peek in, and if you look at the television monitor in the right-hand corner, this is a live video feed of, again, what's going on just one floor below us. That's the current mission control. The television makes it look small. It is not. It's as large as the room in front of you. And those controllers are working with our 6 astronauts that are on the International Space Station. We have 2 American, 3 Russian, and 1 Japanese on station. And the average length of time that an astronaut will stay on the space station is about 6 months. So now turning our attention back to historic mission control, you see a room that's just filled with consoles out there. And on each one of the consoles on the top of it, there's a green and white name tent that tells us in English or in that strange NASA language what function was performed in each of those consoles. And each of the consoles was responsible for one aspect of mission support, and all 19 controllers working together, and we had our astronauts taken care of 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. One way to think about mission control is thinking about the dashboard of your car. That shows you how all of the systems in your car are performing, but it doesn't actually drive the car. That's pretty much what mission control is all about here. So all of these controllers had very, very important and high-stress positions, but the most stressful position in the room was their boss. And that position was called the flight director. And perhaps the most important, perhaps the most well-known flight director was Gene Kranz, and he is the one that famously said, failure is not an option. when Mission Control was working feverishly to get the Apollo 13 astronauts back home safely. You can see his console. It's on the second row of consoles, right in the very middle of the room. Flight Director. All by itself. Now, the Flight Director was the only controller position out there that was allowed to make decisions during the mission, go or no-go decisions. And once he made that decision, it was final and it could not be overturned. Yes, huge amount of power, but if you'll think about it, also a huge amount of stress. Because if you were a flight controller, you knew that when you came to work for your 8-hour shift, anything that happened in space was your responsibility. And you could not have a mistake with your decisions, because one mistake could jeopardize the lives of the astronauts. So there were not a lot of people that were wanting to be astronauts. Now, the way we could communicated with our astronauts in those days is the same as we use today. If you look on the third row, one row past the flight director and slightly to the left, you will see one that says Spacecraft Communicator. And the Spacecraft Communicator is also known as Capsule Communicator or CAPCOM. This is the only position that's allowed to speak to the astronauts while they're in space. Even the flight director does not speak directly to the astronauts. He goes through the spacecraft communicator. And that's so that we only have one voice coming from Mission Control. No confusion. One voice only. And by agreement, the only people that were allowed to sit there were other astronauts themselves. And there's a lot of reasons for that, but the main ones are when the astronauts are orbiting in their spacecraft, when they call down here to Mission Control or to Houston, they want to speak to one of their own. They want to speak to one of their buddies, an astronaut that they've known for years, that they've trained with, probably can finish each other's sentences, that knows the inside and out of their spacecraft and also the goals and expectations for their mission. So that's one of the big reasons that we only have astronauts at that console. Now, the consoles themselves all have television screens in them, but we tend to just automatically assume that those are personal computers, because that's all we ever see anymore. But I have news for you. Believe it or not, in the 1960s, there was not one personal computer inside Mission Control. The reason for that is they hadn't been invented yet. These are just data monitoring stations. If you remember that analogy I made about the dashboard of your car, that's what will show up on these screens here. Now the computers we did have in those days there were some available, but they were located on the ground floor of this building. And the reason for that is because they were mainframe computers. All of these consoles were wired to the mainframe computers on the ground floor. If you've never seen a mainframe or a picture, just look at this room, because one mainframe computer would fill this entire room. No exaggeration. And because the computers were so large, one person could not operate the computer. It took 4 or 5 people all around the room to make that computer work. And perhaps most amazingly, this room-sized computer, its total memory capacity, 5 megabytes. 5 megabytes equals about 10 digital photos, ladies and gentlemen. So if you've taken 10 digital photos here at Space Center Houston, as soon as you took that 10th photo, you just used up all the memory that we had in this building when we were sending men to the moon and returning them safely to Earth. And that is a round-trip journey of about 500,000 miles, ladies and gentlemen, all on the memory of 10 digital photos. Isn't that amazing? Isn't that amazing? Come on, folks, this is good stuff. I'm telling you now. Hang in with me here. You take your cell phone and you open any app on it, I do not care which one, I guarantee you that you have much more computing power in the palm of your hand than we had in this entire building in those days. As a matter of fact, your ringtone may use more memory. So don't you have new respect for your phone now? Well, ladies and gentlemen, before we go to our next stop on the tour, I would like to, my final point is to try to emphasize the history and the human drama that took place in this room where you are. Remember, this is the only Apollo mission control on the planet. On July 20th, 1969, the world heard Neil Armstrong, first astronaut on the moon, say the famous words through the speakers in this room here. He said, "Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed." And then we fast forward to December of 1972. The last Apollo astronaut on the moon, Eugene Cernan, had these words to say as they were lifting off the surface. He said, "We're on our way, Houston." So if you caught that, that means that the word Houston was both the first and the last word ever spoken on the surface of the moon by humans. Isn't that cool? Yeah. We think it's cool in Houston, that's for sure. Well, ladies and gentlemen, pinch yourself and remember when you go back, when the astronauts were orbiting the Earth, traveling to and from the moon, orbiting the moon, walking on the moon, when they were speaking to Houston and Mission Control, this is where they were speaking to, and you're here today. Well, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of NASA and Johnson Space Center and Space Center Houston, we want to thank you again for choosing to be our guest here today. We're on a really tight schedule. We have a huge number of guests today, which we love. If you could help us, please, as you go back to the tram, please remember to sit in your same seat and row that you used to come over and have those boarding passes ready for us. Have a wonderful day here at Space Center Houston, ladies and gentlemen, and please come back and see us again real soon. Thank you.